First of all, I want to say a great big thanks to Annette, my beautiful wife, who's here, and let's give her a round of applause. I want to begin with some thanks on behalf of Tonette. Now, you see, I get asked a lot over the last year and a half, why did you do the things you did? Why did you take the actions you did? And for us, it was simple. It's two reasons. One's named Matthew, the other's named Alexander. Those are our two sons. The reason I bring that up in the context of thank you, not just thank you for those of you from Wisconsin or those who've come to Wisconsin in the last several months, but those of you from all across this country, whether you were watching Wisconsin or just thinking about what we did, but thank you on behalf of my two sons, our two sons, for your being here focused not just on politics, but on policy, because it's not just about elections that matters, it's what happens after the elections that matters even more to my children and your children and grandchildren.
Can we set this on top?
I also want to say thanks, and a number of people mentioned it to me tonight, before the dinner started and throughout the dinner, but I want to particularly say thank you, because so many of you from, again, around not only around Wisconsin, but around the country, not only offered up your support, your moral support, your political support, most importantly, people offered up their prayers for me and my family, and I cannot thank you. One of the most sustaining things was not long after we started to get some of the bigger protests in our state capital, I decided to get out of the bunker mentality and get out on the road. And so I went to factories and farms and small businesses around my great state. And what I found was very uplifting. You see, years ago, there was a governor by the name of Lee Sherman Dreyfus who had it right back about 30 years ago. He used to say that Madison at the time was about 30 square miles where our capital is at. And he said Madison was 30 square miles surrounded by reality. And so I like to get out to reality and get around the state, because what I found was not just at groups like AFP and others, but I found in those factories and farms and small businesses alike, I'd find guys that would come right off the line in their shift and come up to me, and the first couple of times I wondered, because it was the thick of all these protests, and they'd get right in my face. These big guys with grease on their shirts would say, "Governor, me and my wife are praying for you." And that just made such a difference to us. So thank you all. About 18 months ago, I took the oath of office as the 45th governor of the great state of Wisconsin. And for those in Wisconsin, they know that the history, the tradition in our state is you take the oath of office in the East Wing, because that's where the governor's office is. I moved it, not just because there was a bust of Bob LaFollette in the East Wing, but I moved it. I can tell some people know the progressive history there. But I moved it around the corner for an even bigger reason. So I moved it around so that I would take the oath of office in front of our state's Constitution. And when I invoked that January 3rd of 2011, it's a part of our state's Constitution. It's never been altered and never been amended. Since the spring of 1848, when the citizens of our state affirmed it on its second vote, there's been a part called the Frugality Clause. It talks about the importance of frugality in government, and on that inaugural day, in my address, I talked about how moderation, not political moderation, but moderation and frugality in government lead to freedom and prosperity for our people. Little did I know on that cold winter day in Wisconsin how prophetic those words would be over the next 18 months. Reverse back in time a little bit to about 18 months before then, and you can see how we got there. You see, when I was running for governor, I viewed things a little bit differently than maybe some candidates. I thought I was in a job interview. So I went around the state for about a year and a half, and I went to the interviewing committee, the voters of my state, and I said, our state faced an economic and a fiscal crisis. And then I told people what I'd do to fix it. As Tim mentioned before, the novelty is after that. After I was sworn in, I actually went out and fulfilled those promises I made on the campaign trail. The interesting part, though, is as we did that, I still remember about a month in, even before our big reforms hit the national stage out there, I had a reporter come in from the Associated Press who was writing a story for a national story just about some of the reforms we had done right off the bat when it came to the economic status of our state. And he said, you know, most governors still haven't even unpacked their bags. The boxes in their office, most new lawmakers can't even find the bathroom in the Capitol, and yet you and your new legislative majorities have acted quicker than just about anybody in the country, faster than just about anybody in the history of your state. Why is that? I said, well, it's simple. You see, I went back to that job interview, and I was interviewing to be the CEO of a troubled government, of a troubled entity. And any of you who own your own businesses or have taken over businesses know, if you're taking over a troubled business, you don't wait a year. You don't wait 6 months. You start fixing it on the very first day you take it over. That's exactly what we did. For us on the campaign, when it came to the economy, it was real simple. I had a saying back in the campaign trail in 2010 that's kind of a nice contrast to what I've heard many talk about the president last month say, which is pretty much the opposite of what I said. And that is, I said it's real simple. People create jobs, not the government. So what I wanted to do was to make it easier for the people of my state and any other people that wanted to come to my state to create jobs. So we took a novel approach. We lowered the tax burden. In fact, our property taxes are down for the first time in 12 years on a median valued home in the state of Wisconsin. We decided we'd change the administrative burden. In fact, you know, we have a simple idea. We think you should enforce common sense, not bureaucratic red tape, and we thought by reining that in, it would make it easier for small businesses to grow and prosper in our state, and that's exactly what's happening. And I'm proud to say we passed some of the most aggressive tort reform in the entire country at one time. The great part about it is, it's working. It's working. In fact, between that and the fiscal stuff I'm going to talk about in a moment, the thing that drove my opponents in the recall election crazy was they couldn't talk about the things they claimed the recall was about. We did. I was proud to run up my record, because you know what? Our record is working in the state of Wisconsin. It can work in other states, and most definitely, it can work in our nation's capital. Bob McDonald talked about it. Bob's a great governor, although I got to tell you, I was just with him last month in Virginia, and he talks a lot about all the great founders and the great patriots that were from Virginia, and I'll concede that. But when he talked about the George Washington Award, which I'm very pleased to be acknowledged with or connected with, because when we were in Virginia the last time, a couple weeks back, we went to Mount Vernon, and I got to tell you, I always loved George Washington, but to be at Mount Vernon just makes you appreciate even more what a great man and a man of integrity he was. But for those of you from Virginia, I want to have you help me remind Bob that as great as it is, and we don't have that kind of history in Wisconsin, but we have something that some of you might argue is a little bit better, and that is a reminder that when you win the Super Bowl, you don't win the Washington Trophy, you win the Lombardi Trophy. With that aside, I just had to get that out of my system. Going back to the economic recovery in our state, the great news is the 3 years before I took office, Wisconsin had lost almost 150,000 jobs, and our unemployment rate was over 9%. This past month, we had the third consecutive month that the unemployment rate was at or below 7%. We've gained thousands of new jobs, and on Chief Executive Magazine, you know, for years in our state, we didn't like to talk about those business rankings. The year before I was in office, we were ranked 41. The year before that, 43. Historically, we were in the bottom 10. Last year, we moved up from 41 up to 24. This year, we moved up to 20. It's the first time we've ever been in the top 20. And look out, Bob and Rick and others, we're aiming for the top 10. And it's not just about the rankings in the state. You know, one of the most amazing things to me when I ran for governor was the fact that my Chamber of Commerce in our state, the Wisconsin Chamber of Commerce, does a survey every year of our employers. When I was running for governor in 2010, you know how many thought we were heading the right direction? It's 10%. Think about that. 10% of your employers think you're heading the right direction. That same survey was conducted earlier this year after a year and a half of our reforms. And how many employers in my state think Wisconsin's heading the right direction? 94%. Competitive, so I want to know what's wrong with the other 6%, right? They must have union contracts in Madison or something like that. But for us, 10% to 94%, we're not done yet. We're going to do even more, but we understand it's not the government that does that. It's getting government out of the way and being a true partner to allow our small businesses and our entrepreneurs to move forward and prosper. And that's exactly where we're headed in the years to come. But as I mentioned, we didn't just face an economic crisis, we faced a fiscal crisis. And in many ways, honestly tackling your fiscal crisis helps address your economic crisis as well. Because if you had employers in your state that know that your state and your local government is stable, I mean truly stable, that helps you give confidence that this is a state and a jurisdiction worthy of investing in. And so we tackled it head on. Bob talked about it, Tim talked about it, others have talked about it. But in our case, a year and a half ago, we inherited a state with a $3.6 billion with a B dollar budget deficit. One of the largest per capita in the country, one of the largest in our state's history. And unlike other states, we decided we weren't going to balance it with tax increases. Not like my neighbors to the south in Illinois, where they kind of joked last year, remember, about how they weren't going to be like Wisconsin. So instead, they raised taxes on individuals 67% and on businesses 46%. A year later, you see how well that's turned out for them? Not very good at all. No, in fact, we lowered our overall tax burden. In fact, states like Illinois and others said, well, they were going to do it through massive layoffs. Well, amazingly, because of our reforms I'm going to touch on in a second, we avoided massive layoffs. Now, I have fewer employees. I have almost 10% fewer employees in my state, but it's through attrition and managed reform, not through random pink slips, because that's not the way to do business. Yet states like Illinois and others who failed to make those tough structural decisions are stuck making those poor decisions. We avoided cuts in essential programs, and instead, what we did was put in place long-term structural reforms. But reforming collective bargaining, we understood that in our state, almost 60% of my budget is aid from the state to the local governments. And having been a local official for 8 years, I knew if you just cut it without giving the tools to local governments, you will force decisions that maybe in many cases are inappropriate. So instead, we gave those tools to the local government so that they could not only balance their budget, but do so in a way that made sense, it was logical. By ending collective bargaining for anything except base salary, and even that we capped at the CPI, in turn, we freed up local governments not just to get pension and health care contributions, but to make fundamental changes in the way that they operate government. The beautiful part about that is we not only took a $3.6 billion budget deficit and turned it into a surplus. For the first time in our state's history, we set money aside to put it in the rainy day fund in 2 consecutive years, and we're going to continue down that path. By making those structural reforms, though, we didn't just help the state, we helped all of our local governments, our 424 school districts, our 72 counties, our nearly 1,800 municipalities. And the beautiful part about it is, it's not a short-term fix. You see, my predecessor and a lot of other governors and legislatures across the country did that. They grabbed money from the stimulus, and instead of putting it in infrastructure as they claimed it was going to be, they put it into bailing out the Medicaid school aid deficit. In our state, they took $1 billion out of the transportation fund and $250 million out of the patient compensation fund. We said, you know what? We're not going to do that. You see, I went back to my kids and said, for Matt and Alex, I want them to grow up in a Wisconsin at least as great as the one I grew up in. I'm not going to pass that burden on to them and future generations. And we said the bills are getting paid now, and that's exactly what we did. You see, for us, it was real simple. You know, Scott Suter, one of our leaders in the state assembly, the majority leader, is here and Scott knows about this because I said it often to the lawmakers. In fact, right after the 2010 election, I met with Scott and all the other Republicans, both those who've been in and those that were just elected. And you all appreciate this here. I got up in front of all of them, and you know, you think you'd say some niceties, and I said, well, you know, here's the deal. It's put up or shut up time. I said, before November 2nd of 2010, everything in Wisconsin was Democrat. The governor, the legislature, both houses in the legislature, the majority of House members, and both U.S. senators. And in November of 2010, we flipped everything. New U.S. senator, majority House seat, majority. But I said the lesson, the message that was important for these new members as well as those who were before, the message for me and my administration was, what I meant by saying it's put up or shut up time is, if we come in and we're just a little bit different than the folks who screwed things up before, the voters will have every right to kick us out 2 years later. And so we're not going to do that. We're going to show that we honor the confidence that the voters in Wisconsin put in us, and we're going to actually act on the things we campaigned on, because that's what they expect us to do. And the great part about that is I reminded them at the thick of the battle, when we had anywhere from 70 to 100,000 people in and around our capital as the most difficult of times, the one thing I reminded our lawmakers over and over and over again is that it was our duty to think more about the next generation than just the next election. And isn't that what you elect us to do? That is fundamentally what this is all about, and that's why we took on both our economic and our fiscal crisis. But I want to spend just a minute or two telling you about the thing I'm the most proud of. Because you know, it's the thing that probably gets the least amount of coverage, not only in my state, but across the country. You've heard about the fiscal and the economic components, and I'm proud of what we did to turn our state around. We're not done yet, but we're headed down the right path, particularly when we contrast it with Illinois or California, other places. But the best thing we did is to make our government work better for the people we elected to serve. You see, a lot of times my critics mistakenly say I hate government. I want limited government. I think smaller government is better government. I think that's what our founders thought, but for the area we have left, what I hate is government that doesn't work. I want government to work for the people we're elected to serve. And I've said for years, if not generations, there's been this false choice in government, not just at the state or the federal, but even at the local level. You've heard about it. The false choice that somehow you either have to choose between raising taxes or cutting core services. It's just a false choice. There's no better, I mean, think about it. Again, any of you in business, nobody said in the last couple of years as the economy got tight, you didn't say, I'm going to double the price of my product, right? Where do people go? They run to your competitor. And you certainly didn't say, I'm going to cut the quality of my service in half. Or again, people would run your competition. Instead, in business, you know, particularly in manufacturing, what do? Lean manufacturing. You find a way to make it all work. You find enough efficiencies to have a good price and a good product, and people stick with you. Why isn't that done in government? The worst example of that is in education. See, Jeanette and I have two sons. One just graduated, the other one's going to be a senior, but last year in the midst of this debate, I pointed out that we've got two sons who go to a public high school in Wauwatosa. And we're property taxpayers in the city of Wauwatosa. So traditionally, we're pitted against ourselves, right? Either your property taxes have to go up or your schools are going to be off. It's a false choice. You see, it's simple. It's a false choice. The question isn't about spending more money. It's about spending the money we have more wisely. More wisely. Let me give you a good example of that in Wisconsin. Before our reforms were put into place, in the 424 school districts in our state, nearly every one of them had to buy their health insurance from just one company. A company that just happened to be affiliated with the teachers union. How convenient, right? Since our reforms, school districts literally can bid out their health insurance, and they're saving tens of millions of dollars. That's money that goes right into the classroom. But you know, it's bigger than just money. Money's important, but it's more important than just money. You see, we're able to change things even bigger than that. A couple years ago, before I was elected governor, before Republicans controlled the legislature, there was a school teacher, a brand new first-year school teacher in the city of Milwaukee, the Milwaukee public school system, who was named the outstanding teacher, new teacher of the year for the state of Wisconsin. Exactly the kind of teacher you'd want in any district, let alone an urban district that was deeply challenged. This is good news. Exactly who you'd want there. About a week after she got notice of her award, you know what happened to her? They told her to lay her off. Now, how could that happen? How in the world could that happen? Exactly the kind of teacher any of us would want in our school district, let alone one is greatly challenged at the Milwaukee public school system, and they saw fit to lay her off. How could that happen? One of the old system of collective bargaining. If you're the last hired, you're the first fired. If you're the last in, you're the first out. One of the greatest things about our reforms isn't that it just saves money. It's now in Wisconsin, no longer is there seniority or tenure. We can hire and fire based on merit. We can pay based on performance. That means we can put the best and the brightest in our classrooms, and we can keep them there. As conservatives, we should never apologize for not being pro-education. We are, because we care about money in the classroom instead of just in the education bureaucracy. We are the ones who care about the kids. We want the money in the classroom because we want to reward performance, and that's exactly what our reforms do. So that's what we did. Our reforms helped us turn around our economic and our fiscal crisis, and most importantly, our reforms allowed us to make the government work better for the people we're elected to serve. But along the way, we faced some challenges. Not unlike some of the challenges we face in this country. People often would say to me, Scott, where do you get the energy? Where do you get the motivation to move on? Where do you get the optimism that things are going to get better? Well, I want to tell you, my optimism comes from this great heritage, this great history that's part of this country. You know, Bob talked a little bit about the founders here nearby in Virginia. Tonette and I, a couple weeks ago, came down for this meeting. We were at Williamsburg, and along the way, on our way in, Williamsburg in of itself, and Jamestown, and Yorktown, and just are amazing to begin with. We went over to Mount Vernon and just had a fabulous time getting to know and love our first president even more and more. But along the way, we also made a trip in Philadelphia. Our kids, Matt and Alex, been to D.C. a lot, but they'd never been to Philadelphia. And one of the great things I loved about taking to Philadelphia was taking them into Independence Hall. You go into Independence Hall, this September we'll honor and remember the 225th anniversary of that great document, our United States Constitution. But one of the great things I love about visiting Independence Hall, it's a great reminder. It's a great reminder about our country. You see, many of you, hopefully most of you have been there, but if you haven't, it's not much bigger than this stage. And as you stand in there and you look at the tables and the desks thinking about this Washington Award, one of the things I love the most is looking at the front and seeing the chair that Washington sat in with the half-rising sun, because I think it embodies not only his optimism, the optimism of the other great president we talked about tonight, President Reagan. But as you sit in that hall and you look at those desks and you look at those chairs, something else strikes you. It certainly struck my kids. It reminds you that the chairs they're sitting in aren't any different than the ones we're sitting in tonight. It's because they were ordinary people. Ordinary people who did something quite extraordinary. You see, these were people at the time who didn't just risk their political careers. They didn't just risk their business ventures. These were leaders who literally risked their lives for the freedoms we hold dear today, and all too many of our fellow citizens take for granted. I mean, think about it. Remember, as a kid, I always thought of our founders as superheroes, as bigger than life. And I think of people like Franklin when he said, if we don't hang together, surely we'll hang separately. These were people who were willing to give their life for the freedoms we hold so dear today. The reason I tell you that is moments like that reinstill in me the confidence, the optimism to know not just in my state, but each of our states and in these United States that we're going to move forward and we're going to prosper. Because that's who we are as Americans. You see, the reason I have great hope for America, the reason I have great hope for this country is I think about visits like that, and it affirms into me everything I love about this nation's history. The fact that for more than 2 decades, or for more than 2 centuries, what has made America great, what has made these United States exceptional, what has made this country arguably the greatest country in the history of the world is simply this. In moments of crisis, be it economic or fiscal, be it military or spiritual, in moments of crisis, what has made this country amazing has been the fact that throughout our nation's history, there have been men and women of courage who thought more about the future of their children and their grandchildren than they thought about their own political futures. Willing to stand with them every step of the way. Tonight, I charge to you this. Let this be one of those moments. Let this be the time in our history that we can look back and say to our children and our grandchildren, we were there. We weren't back in our seats at home behind the TV. We were there in the trenches. We were at the Capitol. We were in our nation's capital. We were everywhere and anywhere where freedom was at risk. We were the ones that stood up for our freedom and our liberty. Let us move forward and make that possible for future generations. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.
Governor Walker, thank you so much for your inspiring remarks. As you've heard repeatedly, but needs to be said again, Wisconsin has long been an important state for AFP. It was indeed 7 years ago, in 2005, we launched our 4th AFP chapter in the state of Wisconsin. Governor, we're proud to have worked so long and so hard in your great state to bring greater economic freedom that we know leads to genuine long-term prosperity. We've watched your work with admiration and supported your policies with enthusiasm because they offer Wisconsin the right path forward. Now, Governor, obviously this is not football, but maybe consider this being the most valuable player in the nation for the advancement of freedom and prosperity. As Chairman of Americans for Prosperity, on behalf of the Foundation, it is indeed my honor to present to you tonight our organization's highest honor. The George Washington Award is presented annually to the one individual who makes a momentous contribution to enhancing economic freedom and prosperity in our entire nation. Past recipients have included national columnist George Will, Senator James Inhofe, our own Foundation Chairman David Koch, radio host Mark Levin, and Senator Jim DeMint. Tonight, we do indeed honor a governor who brought through his principled leadership, sound free market philosophy, and strong political courage It's made a great state of Wisconsin more prosperous while providing a shining example for the rest of our nation. Governor Walker, on behalf of the Americans for Prosperity Foundation, it's my honor to present you our George Washington.
In terms of your reference, I should remind you I come from the state that has Aaron Rodgers, the MVP, Brian Braun, the MVP, Miss America is Miss Wisconsin, and Donald Driver has the mirror ball for Dancing with the Stars, right? But seriously, I mean, not just for this award, but to be in front of just so many committed individuals, not just in the realm of politics, but committed to liberty and freedom, as I mentioned, for all of our citizens, and particularly, most importantly, for our coming generations. It really is an honor. One of the things that was great and very touching for Tonette and I, when we were at Mount Vernon a few weeks ago, was along the way we went over to where our first president is buried. And the folks from the foundation allowed us to join with a group that was there, and then much to our surprise, they asked our sons, Matt and Alex, to lay a wreath on the tomb of President Washington. And then they gave me one of the president's favorite prayers to read as they were doing that. And I got to tell you, it just affirmed to me why many things, but why in our country we should get back to honoring the separate birthdays of Washington and Lincoln in February. When you think of the unbelievable leadership of George Washington, not just as the president, but throughout his tenure serving our country, it's certainly worthy of all of us, but particularly our school children, to know just how important that is, and not just be confused thinking it's a day to sell more mattresses and cars. Because between Washington and Lincoln, and yes, in that great month as well, on February 6th, Reagan, our children, and future generations need to know about the great leaders that made and continue to make our country great, so that in the future, they know what kind of leaders to turn to when they make decisions on their own about who to put in office and who to see stays in office. Thank you for putting that focus on Washington.